All right, welcome everyone. Welcome today to our webinar using analytics to build solid supply and supplier management relations. As you know, if you've attended Halo webinars before, we do these about every 6 to 8 weeks. Our focus is on helping you really think about how to leverage the data in your organization to improve your business and how to overlay analytics and information on top of that data. We know there's lots of information out there in the world about analytics, really hot topic, but our focus is on the real practical kind of no BS approach to what can you do as a business each day to leverage information. Today I'm going to be presenting along with a special guest, Laura Cecere, founder of Supply Chain Insights, and Nate Weaver, Halo's Senior Director of Pre-Sales Engineering. And we'll take a bit of time to talk about what's happening in the world of supplier management and analytics, and also take you through a real live demo, an example of using tools to make some better decisions. Now, before introducing Laura, I'll give her a little background. We met with Laura probably about a year ago. She's an awesome person. We felt like a great connection for us in terms of a shared desire to really use data and research to focus on what needs to be done in the world of analytics that's applied to the supply chain. And as an enterprise strategist, Laura focuses on changing the face of enterprise technologies. Her research at Supply Chain Insight is designed for the early adopter seeking first mover advantages. Current research topics include the digital consumer, supply chain sensing, some of that we'll be talking about today, demand shaping and revenue management, market-driven value networks, accelerating innovation through open design networks, and the evolution of predictive analytics, including business intelligence. And she advises vendors and users around the world on strategies to improve supply chain performance. I can tell you that in preparing for this webinar, we had meetings with Laura while she was in China, Europe, and San Francisco. So before I hand this over to Laura, there are a few things I just want to cover with you for housekeeping. We're recording today's session. We'll post it on our on-demand webinar page, and you can visit our website to listen to this or any of our other webinars. Additionally, we'll send out the slides to all attendees within 24 hours, and we'd like to encourage you to share these slides with others in your organization that may have interest. And if you have questions, reach out to Laura or myself to set up a discussion afterwards. Now, during the session, we want to hear questions about our findings and have a good discussion. So please post chat or questions to the QA functions to the left of your screen. We've left time at the middle and at the end of the webinar to address questions. We'd love to have some ongoing discussion. And finally, we will be live tweeting the webinar. So if you'd like to join in the social media conversation, you can use the hashtag SCI webinar and @Halo_BI during the event. We have a lot going on today, great information, so let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand a presentation over to Laura. She's going to tee us up. Laura will talk, and then we'll come back and start about a discussion about supplier development and then take you through a live demo. So with that, over to Laura.
So when we think about the supply chain, I think about from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier. And the pressure is on because the growth has slowed, and what is happening is that people are being asked to do more with less. And one of the things that we were tracking is how are we doing in 2015, because we have the full year results, 2015, and how does 2015 compare to 2006? So if we think back, 2006 was the first full year before the recession. 2015 is almost a decade later. And what we wanted to do was to look over that period of time from 2006 to 2015 and ask two questions. The first question is, what was the average for that particular industry? Because you can see that every industry has a different potential. So retail apparel had a year-over-year revenue growth of 10% for the period of 2006 to 2015. Mass retail had a year-over-year growth rate of 6% in that same period. But we also wanted to know, if we compare 2006 to 2015, what can we learn? And the interesting thing is that, when we learn about what's happening here, what we can see is that the industries are not able to really drive either higher levels of margin or higher levels of inventory turns or higher levels of cash to cash. Red represents that we're going backwards and green represents that we're going forward. And you can see that there's a lot more red than there is green. And most companies are struggling because we find that 9 out of 10 companies are not making improvement. And one of the reasons that I'm going to talk about is demand and supply volatility has increased. Now, it's one thing to say that demand volatility has increased, but when you measure demand latency, so demand latency looks at how long does it take to translate an order into demand signals for the organization, we see that the demand latency, or the representation of an order into the supply chain, has increased by 60%. So the order that I used to manage when I was the supply chain leader at Clorox or Procter & Gamble has changed. The order has more latency. So not only has mean absolute percent error increased, but demand latency has increased. Supply volatility has also changed because we haven't really dealt with the issues of supplier viability, and many times things like packaging and consumer products or actives and pharmaceuticals are a barrier and a constraint, and our tools for MRP do not allow us to really manage materials as a constraint. Now, the other thing we see is that companies that are well aligned between sales and operations can make faster improvement, but there's a big gap between commercial teams and operations teams, and many times people will say, wow, the supply chain team, really is not about the customer, it's about sales. And I say, if we're going to win in supply chain, we've got to build analytics infrastructure that goes from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier to allow the supply chain to sense, to have an intelligent response, and to learn. Today, the supply chain only responds, and it responds in a rote batch job. The other thing is, when we think about supply chain visibility, people will say, well, I need to improve visibility. And I say, well, how do you define visibility? There are many different angles of visibility. We find that companies that have ability to get to data and visibility are able to drive higher level of performance at the intersection of return on invested capital, operating margin, and customer service and inventory turns. And the other issue we have is availability of skilled people to do the job. Many people are retiring in supply chain, the first and second generation pioneers, and many of the kids or millennials are coming out of school, and they don't have the patience to use some of the ERP screens. They want data that's very usable, and they want data in the cadence of the market. So when we think about analytics, we've got to think about how do we overcome the issues. And so when we ask companies, does your supply chain work well, or is there room for improvement, we find that the companies that have better analytics, typically cloud-based analytics that go across heterogeneous environments with a line of business leader working hand in hand with IT. So it isn't an IT project, but it's cloud-based and it allows it to operate in a heterogeneous environment. And they can use and access data, and they have better visibility, and they're dealing with the organizational change management issues, that they are more likely to say that their supply chain is working well. And the opposite, where they can't get to data, IT is managing the analytic strategy, they don't have a clear vision for visibility, they're more likely to say, whoa, there's a lot of room for improvement. And, it's not as easy as we once thought, because the conventional wisdom when I was a Gartner analyst in 2001 to 2003 was that we were going to build analytics on ERP backbones, and ERP was going to be the backbone of the supply chain. And that's not the prevailing thought today. I know there's a lot of tension in the organization around standardization, but the analytics that's grown up through ERP is really very helpful for transactions, but not necessarily decision support, and not for insights. And the reason is that planning data is time phase data, and much of the data that we need for insights has got to be harmonized and synchronized across instances because we don't have one instance of ERP. Most companies have 5. In fact, I work with one company that has 200 instances of ERP. And the other thing is that we have to be able to use different data sets and variety of data, and that requires harmonization and synchronization in cloud-based analytics. Now, the good news is that the market is growing up in cloud-based analytics, and the ability to use data variety in these cloud-based analytics by the line of business is really, really exciting to me. You know, when I was building software in the 1990s, the world really revolved around the DBA. You know, if we wanted a report, we focused on the DBA and we tried to get as good as we could at what that report needed to be. But we never could really predict what the business wanted because as soon as we designed the report and we got everything baked with the DBA, the business changed. And, you know, my DBA would say, well, Laura, why didn't you ask me for that in the beginning? But I didn't know. So we played this dance. But the ability to have flexible cloud-based analytics that can be run by the business and easily deployed in heterogeneous systems like Halo is really exciting to me. So, you know, the greater the number of ERP instances, the larger the business pain, the better and the more critical the need for cloud-based analytics. You know, when we look at the ability to go across the organization to drive alignment and to really drive improvement, I think we've got to think about this analytics layer that sits on top of what I call the alphabet soup. So I've been an analyst for almost 15 years, and I try to shun acronyms, but it is really hard because the supply chain leader talks alphabet soup. My CRM to your ERP, and we'll do an APS and tie it to SCE, and then we'll do a WMS, and, you know, we'll tie it to BW. I mean, it's all alphabet soup, right? This was all about operational, transactional data. It was about, you know, the ability to use the architectures that we had in the 1990s, which were primarily license-based and very limited by memory. You know, memory today is cheap. And so what's happening is this evolution of cloud-based and streaming analytics and the ability to have discovery and to be able to bring data variety and systems together across ERP instances and across, you know, even trading partners to be able to look at analytics. And so I see the evolution of this analytics layer that's evolving on top of the alphabet soup, connecting to workforce productivity. Now, what needs to happen is we need to blow up our Excel ghettos, right? Because our 3-letter acronym systems were so tough to use, most people have pools of people that are using Excel spreadsheets. And an Excel spreadsheet is problematic because everyone's data is different and it's hard to make decisions. So sometimes I'll go to a client and everybody will have their laptop open and it's like dueling ERP spreadsheet kind of answers, and we talk about who has the better answer in cell 62. That needs to change. We need to blow up our Excel ghettos. We need to think about analytics architectures past the alphabet soup, and we need to really focus on workforce productivity. Now, the other tension that we have in the organization is this line of business versus IT. You know, the IT team is typically so busy and heads down on keeping the organization running that they may not know about this wealth of vendor capabilities that's growing up in cloud-based analytics. And sometimes they'd like to standardize on a common system, and that limits the opportunities. And, you know, I was talking to a client yesterday who had implemented cloud-based analytics, and he's like, it's 1/20th the cost, and, you know, it can be deployed in weeks. And, you know, when I was doing it on my ERP infrastructure, it was months and it was very, very expensive. And when I ended up, it was inflexible. But, you know, that's one of the reasons why so many of the analytics projects are not rated so highly. So in this slide, you can see some of our research that it's a flip of a coin today whether or not an analytics project is going to be successful. And we need to reverse that. And we reverse that, I think, by putting power in the line of business hands, by allowing systems that are flexible, that can adapt as business changes, because you can't predict what you're going to need in a report. And we also need to have our systems that can adapt as we have mergers and acquisitions, or we need to add suppliers because the business changes. We can't just have a very inflexible analytics system on top of ERP. The other thing is, as we look at the talent gap, I've read a lot of literature that says that we need 7 supply chain professionals for every one we have today, and that these professionals really need to understand process and analytics. Well, we make analytics pretty hard, but you can see in this particular slide that when we look at talent and we find that the greatest skill gap and where we're having the greatest tension is in planning. It's the ability to use analytics. And one of the issues as we look at turnover and getting people there, because we're going to have to train them, is do we have analytics that are easy to use? Do we have analytics that can adapt and can go across systems? And that's one of, I think, our opportunities that we're talking about here. Now, as we think about outside-in processes and changing the face of what's happening in financials, where 9 out of 10 companies are stuck, we see a confluence of technologies that are happening, and these technologies together will redesign supply chain processes. So when people say we have best-in-class processes and we're just going to go on a 10-year journey to put these best-in-class processes in, I say, whoa, we really need to embrace, the advanced analytics along with the Internet of Things, which is streaming data, 3D printing, robotics, and social sentiment analysis to be able to make the digital pivot, build outside-in processes, and build a data strategy for clouds, which clouds go across the different systems and allow us to see data. Streams, which is high velocity data. Not all data needs to fly first class, but streaming data architectures allow us to use the Internet of Things, things like telematics, and data lakes for discovery. And then we also need to think about analytics maturity. We cannot really drive the insights we need to drive by using Excel spreadsheets. They're just not predictive enough. So most of the analytics we have today in the organization are descriptive. They allow us to see. We can see the data, but they're not predictive. We have some linear optimization that we've got through advanced planning, but some of that doesn't fit, and maybe I need a different predictive model. So the predictive models that are growing up in the cloud-based solutions allow us to be able to do optimization, and also allows us to be more prescriptive. And prescriptive analytics allow us to offer alternatives. So you see prescriptive analytics the most often on Google Maps or perhaps MapQuest, where you've plugged in a location and the GPS says that there is an accident and offers an alternative route. That alternative route has come through prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive and cognitive analytics is where we're headed, and in the cloud. And cognitive analytics basically allows us to think, and it allows us to think about how do we bring learning into the supply chain so that we can evolve over time. So, as you think about this, we're at the very beginning of the evolution of analytics, but the good news is that they're easier to deploy and they're much lower cost than some of the traditional options. But as we think about these projects, we have to change our paradigm, and part of this is leadership to really talk and work with analytics. And so our traditional paradigm is we're going to have large projects with known outcomes. We got in a conference room, we did the as-is and the to-be state. But with these cloud-based analytics, with predictive and prescriptive analytics, we can have small projects that evolve, and they can be cloud-based deployments. And we can use unstructured and structured data and data with high velocity and the business can no longer be hamstrung by IT, and we could start to build outside-in processes. So, one of the issues that we've had with either point-of-sale data or supplier data is that all the data is different, and it requires synchronization and harmonization, and that's one of the things that you'll see in the demo today, is the ability to synchronize and harmonize data. It isn't just about integration. The data has different contexts, the data requires some mapping, and the ability to do that easily is one of the advantages of tools like Halo, and then to test and learn and to evolve. So as you think about the traditional approach versus what we're headed into with analytics, we've got to really rewire our brain. So I'm just going to wrap up now. I love the new forms of analytics. I'm writing a very detailed report in June, and it will be available to anyone that wants it. We write open content around the evolution of analytics and supply chain. I am so psyched about it, and one of the forms is Halo, and I think Halo is very easy to deploy, and it is designed for the line of business user, and it is a much cheaper alternative with greater power than what we've had in the last 5 years. But business leaders need to step up and own their own platforms. They've got to learn the new language of analytics. They can't just be stuck in the traditional paradigm. We need small, scrappy groups that can test these new forms of analytics and build analytics core competency. And finally, I'll just leave you with the fact that I don't think we have best practices. I don't think that we should be proud of the fact that 9 out of 10 companies are stuck and that they can't use data. And as a result, I think we've got to learn from the past, unlearn, and then rethink the supply chain processes. And I think the starting point is rewiring our brains to think about new forms of analytics. So I'll pass it back to you now, and I think now we're going to do a demo and work through what Halo has to offer.
Super, thanks, Laura. I really resonate too with what we just heard around good analytics. What does it really mean? It means having the people, the process, the technology all in place. As Laura gave us some detail, all three are important. Our feeling is that technology it ultimately plays an essential role delivering information, but up front, it also can play the role of being the spark, the way to build some momentum in the organization. One of the real recent successes we've had with one of our clients, they're a major retailer based down in Atlanta, and after pulling an initial set of their sales and finance data together, the first thing the group did down there was put together a set of executive dashboards that set up on their C-level executives' laptops every morning. Great way just to think about the people process of getting executives bought in, get them excited, they talk to the rest of the organization, builds momentum for further investment and further commitment around analytics. What I want to do is, first of all, just take a minute to describe Halo. I thank you, Laura, for the update. What do we do as a company? So we're effectively a business analytics company, a BI company. We have got a competency in supply chain, the value chain, and we really think a lot of the good stuff in terms of using analytics to improve your business happens at the edges of the supply chain. By that we mean both with the supply and supplier management that most companies engage in, and at the other end it's customer and channel management. That obviously moves us into the extended supply chain, which is what information do we have or can we share outside of our own organization to really improve and gain margin improvements and growth opportunities. So we're going to focus on the supply and supplier management section today and take you through a very specific application area that we focus on. What makes us really different? I think most of the time when we talk about people, a lot of them don't really know about Halo. I'll share with you some of our awesome customers in a second, but what we are is a data analytics company that's using traditional as well as latest technologies together to really bring down the cost of delivering data and analytics to the organization without losing the sophistication. And from our perspective, many companies need to bring in technology, and it's going to be on premise, and that absolutely happens and should be supported, and we do that. And on the other hand, there is a great movement towards moving applications into a cloud-based environment so that you can fund them differently, leverage them in different ways, and we support that as well. We say one thing as a vendor on our side is you don't really have to make that choice today. You should be able to have either a cloud-based deployment on-premise or a hybrid environment. So what we do is sit on top of most of these major systems and then link them together and make it easy for you to leverage analytics without having to do a rip and replace environment, to leverage a multi-month, multi-year, multi-million-dollar effort to get going with analytics. Our approach is really, we've built our proprietary data integration tools in place with most all ERP, CRM, cloud and on-premise tools, so you can easily get to the data that you want. We then host it in a non-proprietary format, so we're based on the Microsoft environment, which means we can use SQL Server, which most of the known world is leveraging at some point at this point, and yet work in companies that are primarily, say, Oracle or SAP based. It doesn't really matter and shouldn't at this point. And as Laura mentioned, most of our implementations are in the 4 to 6 week time frames based on the automation that we bring to the table. And as Nate will show in the demo in a few minutes, once we have that data in place, a real key part of really growing the business is being able to leverage that data with your trading partners. Those are your external suppliers, the other data experts in with your company. But at the end of the day, we're making our lives easier for the business managers that need data quickly to make decisions. And I just put a last note down here. We have 252 global customers with over 6 years, 96% retention and growing. So we're real pleased with the approach and the business model that we've taken. And about Halo, we operate in the United States primarily based in San Diego, but we also operate out in Asia Pacific through offices in Australia and New Zealand, and in Central Europe through an office in Vienna, Austria. You can see up here the range of lines of business that we support and the range of verticals. So I think an interesting thing about supply chain analytics is when you focus either on upstream supplier relationships or downstream customer relationships, it doesn't matter. Globally and across verticals, these types of applications can be used in many companies of many sizes. So what I wanted to do today is we're going to go through a specific case example. As I mentioned, we'll focus on suppliers, on the sales, revenue, finance side of the business, and customers. Today we're going to focus on suppliers, and we'll come back and talk about customers next time. And overall, supplier development, does it really matter? Well, plenty of research suggests now that, yeah, absolutely, it can have significant benefits in the company in terms of hard and costs and savings and indirect savings as well. 7 to 10% average improvement in delivery responsiveness, improvements in quality and product development. These are all documented outcomes from a RAND study that was conducted a couple years ago, looking at specific examples. And as you see, one example here, they can go from very simple benefits to benefits that really change the organization as a whole. But the idea here is that supplier development is kind of a proven quantity, something that we should all be focused on. The challenge here is that, as most of the companies that we talk to, most of the companies, I would say in the world, unless they're in that Fortune 500, the GE class, would have supplier measurement programs that they're less than satisfied with. And they don't have necessarily the data in place to measure performance, and therefore it impacts their ability to really leverage them and improve their business processes. Why does this occur? Why is it so difficult, and why do supplier development practices fail or fail to take off? A lot of this has to do with the fact that companies need to be able to handle what we call the bird's nest of data. A typical company that we're working with, say in the Midwest, would have 3 ERPs, 3 or 4 procurement systems, a lot of Excel, all data that have been rolled up separately, and they don't have the ability to consolidate that data to tell a better story. On the other hand, we work with companies that don't have an ERP yet. They have the need, they have data and Excel and some other areas, but the same issues are resolved. One has incredibly complex data they need to pull into a common environment. Again, that's where Halo focuses. The other is an organization that has some data but needs to have a practice in place and a best practice to really move that forward, and Halo supports that as well. At the end of the day, though, data is too complex and too difficult with standard systems and standard approaches to really make a lot of progress. And if we don't address these issues, what are the opportunities? What are the risks? Well, major supply chain disruption, a loss of revenue, late orders, these are all the real practical day-to-day pains that we face that cost us money and create risk for us. Our view in this situation is that a lot of companies will focus on their suppliers and supply chain from a risk perspective, looking at things like weather. Yes, weather is important. Looking at insolvency of their businesses, looking at fraud. But realistically, research that we see would indicate that really the 80-20 rule applies here. 80% of your opportunity comes from doing a better job of measuring your suppliers, developing your relationships with them, and using those to really improve the overall processes and look for a greater margin in the opportunity on the day-to-day versus focusing on kind of low probability, high risk events. Important too, but a topic for a different day. And we have a kind of a conceptual framework that we use here. We call the time value of supplier intelligence to clarify this. Let's take the issue of an order that's been canceled from a large customer. We have a big problem here, which is, in one case, our inventory drops below a minimum, a very standard, we're stocked out, and a product is not shipped to support it. These are standard costs. We have to make this happen to get the product in place to fulfill our orders. If we don't know that in time, the longer it takes us, we call this the event horizon, the higher our costs become. Everything from having to rush the product, change our labor schedules, to simply expediting of costs and materials, all increase the cost. And at some point beyond that event horizon, we really have no time to respond, and then we've created a significant loss. So this is the risk, and then the opportunity here comes out of looking at these things and saying, how do we use our data to really answer the questions and not have this happen again? So one question is, why didn't I know this was going to happen? That's a manager's question. Do we have the data to address this? Do we not have the data available from key support, from our key sources? Are we not able to get to this data in a way that allows us to address the question? And this is where data analytics should come into play and address these very specific types of questions and allow us to make decisions earlier and better so it reduces our costs, increases our satisfaction from our customers. That's end-to-end supplier visibility from our perspective. What's the solution to this approach? Well, there's a number of different ways to address it. What we're going to share with you today is a way to bring your data together in a low-cost fashion and a relatively unique way of visualizing the data, understand where the risks are quickly, and then drill down without having to go through kind of the fire drill in the organization to figure out what happened and how to avoid it. And by bringing all the data together in a Halo environment, we'll show you how you can automate the process and then really make these decisions better, enabling the whole organization. And the problems we'll address by doing this, these are some of the ones that should be, I think, real tactical and practical for everybody, which is, how does my supplier base look? Should I be expanding or contracting my base of business with particular suppliers? Who's the best, who's the worst, and how do I communicate that back to them? What sort of incentives, rewards, warnings can I put in place to manage that? And then what information do I need for that communication on an ongoing basis? We have this information in place, we move ourselves to an area where we have lots of action opportunities. So to make this all happen, we need a framework in place to really think about where we invest in starting to get access to our data, how to roll it together. So our 5-step process here really focuses on, number one, knowing your supplier. Not easy, as we all know. Probably, in fact, one of the biggest issues is simply coming up with a consolidated view of who our suppliers are. And this is where master data management comes in and creating what we call a golden record for each of your suppliers. The one thing about Halo is an end-to-end solution is we provide that back-end capability to manage your data, all of your supplier information, so you can visualize at the front end. You need to have that back-end piece solved in order to leverage all the front-end types of visualization and the reporting capabilities you might have. And then scorecarding is the initial place it comes out of that. So what we want to do is a 3-step process. Measure how our suppliers are doing, then begin the process of interacting and communicating with them so that we can then resolve deficiencies related to specific supplier relationships, and ultimately engage with the ones that we choose to share information with them that can have multiple benefits. One is developing better demand sensing all the way downstream to help with product design. The other is to help them clearly understand if they're not meeting expectations, why, where, and how. And having an environment in place that's driven by a strong, credible database gives you the confidence to deliver information that you're comfortable with. And then kind of at the end of this roadmap, at the end of this maturity curve is real integrated partnering, where you're able to start then collecting information on your second-tier suppliers and develop supplier networks through existing vendor opportunities or relationships out there or your own, but using them strategically to improve your business. So this 5-step process is really what's needed conceptually to then think about how to start working with data. We're going to be very simple here in talking about Halo for supplier management, a real easy-to-use solution. It focuses on 3 things. One is improving visibility, and by that we mean understanding how your suppliers are performing, how is your relationship with them in terms of your agility, your ability to work with them to improve, and then last of all, sharing. Information and collaboration must be shared across both groups, both parties, to really make this really leverageable. So we want to understand how they're doing. We want to communicate that to them, and we just want to start building plans in place to improve. As we go through the demo, we'll jump onto this next. I just want to make an important point that I think sometimes people miss is different types of technology have different requirements. Many of the capabilities in the market are kind of fixed. You have to work the way that they work in terms of their workflows to get data into the right format. Because of the architecture that I described at a high level earlier, the approach that Halo takes is very configurable. What that means is we get your data into an environment where you can use it, and then we can come in and help you understand what your priorities are and how you think about suppliers and your policies and procedures. They're obviously different across every particular customer. Halo is a platform that allows you to have the capability to work with pre-built templates and applications, but then modify them to meet your specific needs. So with that, real high-level view, we've talked about an overall framework for doing supplier management, and just to make it real, Nate's going to take over. He's going to walk you through a specific example with the Halo platform, and then we'll come back for some questions and hopefully discussion.
Thank you, Keith. So one thing that I'm going to do is walk you through several examples of how our customers use our supplier management package. So what I'm going to do is go back one slide, and you'll see me focus on this a little bit as we go through. Now, coincidentally, I was on the phone with one of our existing customers today, and we were talking about their use of Halo internally. One thing that was interesting about them, they've grown through merger and acquisition over the years, and they've taken it further than even I knew. So they have 3 ERP systems now, 2 versions of Dynamics AX, 1 instance of Microsoft GP. They have a CRM system in place. They have warehouse management systems, all the way into other supply chain management packages. And they're tying all of this together using the Halo data warehouse architecture that will go through, cleanse the data, and make sure you're actually looking at one single version of the truth. So that's very important, because here, when I start to show the actual demo environment, this is a mock-up of how several of our customers are using it. So the one that I'm going to focus on today is actually a different customer. They're a leading distributor of hardware to Lowe's, Home Depot, other larger hardware chains like an Ace Hardware, etc. And they have a global supply chain footprint. They source from all over, and they need to manage that effectively. Well, after delivering the supplier management package, I'm going to walk through a few examples of how they actually use it. So the question that I often get in the sales side when someone's looking at it for the first time is, well, who is this for, right? When I launch into it, you can see the first thing it does is go to an executive dashboard. So this suits all the needs of a VP of supply chain, a director of procurement, the entire purchasing team, or the buyers that would be working with the suppliers on a daily or weekly basis, right? They're the ones that understand the terms, the reorder points. They own the relationship with those suppliers. So they may be managing those touch points in a CRM system, and then transactions are coming through as purchase orders in the ERP or turning into the data warehouse. So I start with the 4 major pillars that we were just showing, right? Cost, quality, delivery, and risk. So I would envision myself as a buyer instantly going to the problems at hand. Not only can I see a quick snapshot of, do I have any problems right now, today, but I can also see with all of the trend lines at the bottom, is it a reoccurring problem? Is it an ongoing trend that is getting worse and worse over time, or is it getting better? So one problem at hand that I'm going to look at is if my goal is less than 10% for a defective rate, I can see here one product category, tie downs, is almost 44% defective. That's a problem for me, right? So I'm going to select on that one product category. You can see that all the other information just updated. They're on time, that's great, but I've had to return them, right? Well, why? What was the problem? So I'm actually going to go to the defective parts report so that I can get additional detail as to what was the defective quantity or who was the supplier that I actually received it from. So instantly the filter is remembered. I can see that looking at tie downs, it was almost 4,000 of the quantity that we had to return or reject. I can see the distribution here and the defective reason, the suppliers that I got it from, right, and all the way down to the actual purchase orders. So again, as a buyer, I'm going to make a decision on maybe who is an alternative supplier that I can get these parts from immediately, right, or a rush shipment. Maybe I will call Nielsen Locks because I've had to return 100% of that purchase order and get them to rush ship me a new shipment to put on my shelves. Because not only did Keith talk about customer satisfaction as this gets all the way down through the sales cycle, that means we need to have this product on the shelf in a Lowe's or Home Depot or Ace Hardware to actually sell it. If I don't, that's a missed opportunity. It also will impact customer service because maybe they drove to that location just to pick up tie downs and they're going to go somewhere else or buy a competitive product. That's a problem for me. So how do I make this decision? As a buyer, I would live in the procurement report. This is really where I would spend the lion's share of my day. Maybe this and CRM, managing my calling schedule, checking in on my suppliers. But here I have instant visibility. Again, my filter's remembered for my tie downs. In this example, I'll go ahead and sort by the highest reject quantity. And I can see that of all of these parts that I've actually received, the ones that are the problems are a 20-foot cable strap. So now I've drilled down into the SKU level detail. And it's also a lock strap. And if I multi-select on those two, I can see that it's all coming from Nielsen Locks, that one purchase order that was my problem, again shown on the defective parts report. But what I'd like to do is select on all tie downs that I get from all suppliers, because maybe I want to look at calling Bricks or Mercury immediately and seeing if they can rush ship me 24-foot cables or lock straps, because potentially I cannot get it from Nielsen that quickly, right? So again, I'm using the information at hand to make better decisions and better manage my supply chain, my supplier base. Now, as I go through that much detail, one thing I'm going to do is just hit the revert button and go back to the overall report. I've cleared the filters. I am now looking at all of my suppliers. In this example, there's 40 of them in this department. I've got my 11 buyers here so that I can easily and quickly go through, select myself as a buyer, and see who I work with down to the SKU level, understand all of the parts that I'm getting, right? 739, that's a pretty decent size department. But let's go ahead and focus on how I actually manage all of my suppliers. For that, I'm going to go to my Supplier Scorecard. On my Supplier Scorecard, I'm actually creating a score. I've indexed several things together so that I can actually measure on an equal terms basis all of my suppliers to determine who's a good and who's a bad supplier for me. And what I mean by that is I've actually ranked from best to worst suppliers, right? I can go all the way down through my entire supplier base. looks like we have 134 total, and again, they're ranked from best to worst. Now, we've used an index score that we recommend as a starting point, and again, we showed this in the slide deck, but its cost is 30%, delivery is 30%, cost, you can read it on the screen, right? Again, it's my 4 major pillars: cost, quality, delivery, and risk. And we often see risk can be internal and external. If it's external, maybe that's done in Bradstreet data that's been pulled in, or any other kind of public source data to understand the economic risk of a supplier potentially defaulting. But internally, we would measure risk on the way that I've been showing. I can see over time that we're spending more with a supplier, their defective rate is increasing over time the more that we order for them. That is a risk for me. So by easily coming here and understanding who is a good and bad supplier, this is again maybe just one of the dashboards that I would live in. If I wanted to alternatively, again, look at bricks to get those tie downs from, well, they're my number 6 rank supplier. That's great. I know they deliver on time, their quality is good, their cost is flat and level, and that they have no actual risk for us. I can also see that their lead time is a little bit long at 50 days, so that could be a reason I would choose another maybe more locally sourced supplier. But their payment terms are good. So again, you aggregate all of this information together, and you can easily understand why they are our 6th best supplier. So just in rounding out the quick demo, not only have I told a story or a day in the life, you can see that this preset tab set, or almost favorites of report, is what would be delivered. I can easily grab the KPIs that I care about, like accepted versus rejected, full versus partial shipment, early versus late versus on time, how much I'm spending with a supplier, and it's very interactive, easy to use, just with my mouse to understand, okay, who's late? Well, how late are they? Maybe I only really care about who is more than 4 weeks late, and always constantly refining that list, right? Again, easily asking and answering your own question as a buyer or as someone who manages your supplier base. One of the last that I'll show, because I've already focused on the first 5, quickly going to an on-time delivery report. Again, to understand not only is it a problem now, but is it a reoccurring problem by supplier, by purchase order? How many days late is it? And what products am I getting that are taking so long for me to actually put on the shelves to resell? So as you probably notice, I've got an on-time delivery goal, which we need to work on, right? This month, it happens to only be 64%. Not very proud of that. Our goal as a company is relatively low at 70%, but that's maybe where we have an opportunity to work with our suppliers and better or increase how often our schedule works to get these parts on time. Maybe we're being unrealistic on our delivery terms. Maybe we're just not working with the right suppliers. Again, I can use this information to make my decision. The last one that I really like to use for internal risk is purchase price variance. So again, I'm going to use the internal collaboration tool here, where I've put all of my notes to remind my team members how we measure economic purchase price variance, right? It's really just the difference between my current purchase price and previous purchase price, because what I want to know as a buyer is my price increasing or decreasing over time? Am I getting better prices, or are my prices consistently being increased from all of my suppliers? Another great reason to look at alternative suppliers to get a better cost or price, but also ways of renegotiating with my suppliers. So as I take it back to the executive dashboard, maybe the last thing that I would like to show to round out how our customers are doing it, all of these dashboards and reports can be scheduled to be sent into my email box every day, but they can also be sent securely to each supplier. So maybe I want to go through and I want to hand pick out a supplier, export that to PDF, share that with a supplier via email so that they can see how we measure them on a monthly basis. That can be automated as well in a secured fashion using our supplier management portal, where they could actually log in and get to this information. Some of our customers have had enormous success with this idea and have actually monetized their data because the information that we're sharing back with the supplier is so valuable that they are selling these reports back to each of those suppliers. Now, as I said, it's being scheduled. I can also do it on an alerting basis. So in this example, I have a little custom message, my suppliers that are delivering below average, and without even logging into the system, I can see which of the 5 or 6 suppliers have dropped below my company average, which right now is running at that embarrassing 64% level. But these are my worst offenders. These are the guys that I need to really work on that are delivering really poorly. And then one thing that you also see, again, is that attached PDF document that actually is the proof or the actual transactions of how late these 6 suppliers are by purchase order. Right? So again, all of the information that I need to get and ask and answer my own questions to better manage my supply chain. With that said, guys, let's turn it right back over to Keith.
Thanks, Nate. We wanted to make sure we had a few minutes left here to answer any questions as they come up for Laura or for ourselves.
So guys, any questions that you have, please go ahead and enter those in the chat window or ask a question, and we will do our best to answer those.
So let me just start with a question. How do you do this without, having the old-fashioned DBA and, how do you get it rolled out so quickly? What's the secret sauce?
When you have an end-to-end business analytics solution, the one thing you have is a lot of power on what we call the back end. It's the automation that allows you to connect to various data sources, bring them together, harmonize them, cleanse the data, and then stage it for analysis. We say that a lot of our focus is on line of business users or primary users, but we also say DBAs love us, and we find this a lot. Why they love us, it's primarily because we're able to save them a ton of time that they typically would have to spend manually coding, connecting to, and cleansing. We call it the ETL, extraction, translation, and loading scripting to connect to sources. And Nate's pulling up here what's our backend, which can be used by somebody with moderate SQL skills, a well-trained business analyst, which is a one-time setup that connects to, at this point, over 43 different data sources, both on-prem or in the cloud. And or that's one of the key pieces here is simplifying how you get access to your data, cleanse it, and then prep it for analysis.
So you guys evolved from really harmonizing data. What did you learn about the design of that back end for data sources that are different? So multiple ERP systems or multiple suppliers or multiple customers. What did you learn that you can bring to cloud-based analytics?
Yeah, the first thing that we noticed is we needed to simplify the tool to make it either easier on a DBA or to not require a DBA in some circumstances. So although our supplier management package is pre-built, we would just map a customer's ERP, CRM, other data sources together. We actually train our customers on how to use this as well so that they can become self-sufficient. So this is a full-blown ETL data warehouse technology that will model all of the data, monitor quality, security, and publish a data model to the front end that makes that Halo front end so easy to use in a drag and drop architecture without any scripting or query languages to learn. So again, we've simplified the whole stack and productized it.
So how long would it take to teach an old gal like me how to do that?
Well, on the back end, there's a bit of a learning curve if you're not a native, maybe SQL person, but typically we go through in just a couple weeks, really. What I would say for a complete 100% rollout, what we often will see is our training courses or classes are only a matter of days, and that is to become fully self-sufficient on maintaining and producing additional supply chain modules that you maybe want to roll out, like sales and operations planning, finance and AR. Whatever it happens to be, that's the purpose of teaching you, training you on how to also support and maintain.
So one last question that we got for the audience is, how good are you at really doing this with SAP or Oracle?
Yeah, so if you guys notice there quickly, we have connectors for all. So we have customers across every data source that you can imagine, and multiple customers using not only the SAP version, but of course Oracle. It's in the dozens of customers out of how many customers mentioned earlier. Many of these are enterprise level as well as smaller mid-market companies.
So, you know, we've got thousands, tens of thousands of tables in SAP, and you know, we've got different software for apparel than we do for manufacturers. That doesn't bother you at all? You know, how do you work with all of that variety of data?
It's a combination of two things. One is, you know, any ERP that's been in place for any amount of time has been customized and is verticalized. So with Halo, we've got 9 years of experience because we started primarily as a company connecting to Oracle, JDE, SAP, and the Microsoft environments of doing that, knowing it, and that's part of the process. We also work with partners who are vertical experts in those areas when that's necessary.
And what if you don't have an ERP system? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so some customers, let's say in our smaller beverage market, they can't afford an ERP, right? So maybe they have something like QuickBooks. It's just account routing software, not considered an ERP, but to them it really is. That's where all of their information lives, right? We often see others, it's point of sale system, so maybe even getting sell-through data from Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, so that they can see what they're selling. So as long as there's data somewhere, even if we just get extracts from CSV or Excel, then we can start to provide similar capabilities I've shown you today.
Well, I think we're out of time. I love what you guys do. I hope people give you a call and at least kick the tires and consider it. Any last words?
I think from the Halo side, it's just that, Laura. We're presenting this stuff because we're excited by it. As I said, the focus of our company is helping other companies get the most out of using analytics. What we showed you today is a prepackaged solution, which is very quick to roll out, and kind of takes us to the point where a line of business user, a manager, a CPO can engage with this type of application very quickly, own it, and then be successful with it. So we do hope to hear from those of you that have more interest. Thanks, everybody. As we say, we do these every 6 to 8 weeks. Laura, as a special guest, was very exciting to have her join us. Be on the lookout for the future. We'll be talking about customer profitability and management. So thank you all.